Welcome to Messy Liberation, the podcast that dives deep into feminism, business, and personal growth. I'm Becky Mollenkamp.
And I'm Taina Brown. Get ready for another messy conversation through the eyes of two intersectional feminist coaches.
Let's get messy. I put on lipstick today for this conversation, and I will have you know that was a political act, and we're going to tell you why.
I saw a TikTok video about what it's like being a boy mom, where a young child put nails or thumbtacks into the foam bullets of his Nerf gun. And apparently that's cute boy mom behavior, or worthy of boy mom content on TikTok. And that is political. And we're going to talk about why today.
So this is our new attempt at making sure that you are hooked in on what we're about to talk about. Yeah. So we'll see how that goes, but we're going to try and give you a little quick hit at the beginning of each episode to clue you in just a little into what we're going to be talking about before we chit chat. Because somebody said that's the best thing to do, which is also, I am sure, quite political. And today we're talking about everything is political, what that means, what that looks like. And we felt like this might be a good way to start this new year, which will also probably be a very political year. So I wonder, Taina, if you could start us by sharing, when you hear everything's political, which I'm going to guess most people listening have heard that in some form, of like, oh, everything's political. What does it mean to you?
Yeah. So for me, what that means is like, there are always power dynamics at play. And so when you're talking about how everything is political, for me, what I'm looking for, or what I mean when I say that, is like, where is power situated in this circumstance? And how is that affecting how people are able to live on a day-to-day basis? Whether that's with your boss or with the politicians or even in your household. Like, where is power situated in your relationships, both on the big level, right, where we normally think of politics, but also at the very, very micro level of our relationships.
I think that's great. I probably have a more, simplified version of that or something. I also just realized that I didn't come in here with the mic set up correctly. So let's hope that it makes it sound okay. But if you're listening and I don't sound great today, I just let you know that that's because I just recognized I fucked up, but it's okay. I think of when I hear everything's political, or when I think about what that means, to me, it means like every decision, choice, even things that aren't a choice, everything that's happening is happening within the vacuum of the systems that we live in. And all systems are inherently political. And because of that, everything that we do within those systems is political, whether we are on the side of having more privilege, and because of that, the decisions we're making are political, or have less privilege, and that means the decisions being made around us, to us, for us are political. But I think for me, I think about that meaning like we can't escape the systems in which we live. Yeah. Even when it's something like what shampoo we're buying. Right. Because all of it exists inside of the systems. And so I think it's helpful to like give some examples. So maybe we go back to the ones we started with, and I'll let you go again. Oh,
that's my Ring camera.
What a lovely child. Oh, are you getting a delivery?
No, every time a car drives by, it goes off. It's annoying.
Oh my gosh, my mom has the same thing with hers. It's really annoying. She gets so frustrated. Anyway, if you want to go back to yours, talking about the boy mom, which as a boy mom, I have lots of thoughts on that whole trend. But specifically the thing you mentioned about the Nerf gun.
Yeah. So that's a TikTok I saw this morning, and have seen several responses to it about how that's not cutesy boy mom kind of content, right? Like that could be an indication that there's a bigger issue happening with your child that you should probably be investigating. And when I say that situation is political, like there's so many layers to it, right? Like outside of like what's actually happening, the whole boy mom, girl mom trends feel really political to me, right? Because they are situated within a gender binary, which I don't believe in, right? And so the fact that it's a boy mom, girl mom, and that's like all you see in terms of that kind of content that's out there on social media it's the erasure of children who may not identify as a boy or a girl. It's erasure of parents who may not identify as moms or dads, right? Who may feel like they are, or who identify as non-binary or gender fluid or gender expansive. And so that whole conversation is, I think, a really good entry point into understanding how talking about yourself, about a boy mom or a girl mom or boy dad or a girl dad is political. But then there's also deeper layers to that, right? Like that little boy who has chosen violence very clearly, right? First of all, Nerf guns. Like I grew up playing with Nerf guns, you know, it's Nerf or nothing. Like I remember those commercials in the 80s on TV. And so with Devin Soya, I can't believe I remember that guy's name. But but the fact that like we make games out of tools that are created to inflict harm on people, guns, right? Like we are literally training children to use guns and to be okay with weaponry. That is political, right? Because we're talking about how do school shooters happen, right? Some child is comfortable enough to pick up a weapon and shoot it at someone else without really understanding the ramifications of that decision. Because it's been so normalized. Violence has been so normalized in our country. There's also an added layer of nuance where it's like, not only is it like play violence, but now it's become real violence because you've added on something that isn't foam that can actually harm another human being. So like what prompted that child to take that action? What prompted the parent to think that that was cute enough to create content about, right? And that child, without any corrective interventions, that child is going to grow up. Because the mom seemed white to me, or at least she was white presenting.
I was going to ask because I had a feeling because, right, if it were a Black child, I can almost guarantee you the comment section, and I don't know what the comment section looked like, but it would be a very different response when a Black boy is shooting a Nerf gun with tacks in it versus a white boy where that white mom thinks, oh, that's cute. A Black mom more than likely would have the sense to know inside of the systems that we exist. First of all, I can't even allow my son to play with Nerf guns.
Right.
Because now I feel so bad that I can't say his name. The 13-year-old boy who got shot.
Who was shot for playing with a toy gun in the park.
Yes, exactly. So she knows well enough that, hey, I need to teach my son about even toy guns and and what that can mean. And certainly would know I wouldn't put this content out showing that my son was using text because I know what will come back at me, what I will hear about, you know, his violence and the kind of person I am. So of course that was a white mom, right? Because she doesn't have, we as white women don't have that level of understanding because we know our boys can go to the park and play, have a Nerf gun battle and be safe. They're not going to get shot by the police. And so we don't think about that. And then to think, oh, it's just cute and isn't that funny? There's so much privilege inside of that, which is, again, very political.
So much. And so I don't know what her child looks like, you know, and her attitude in the video was very much one of just like casual annoyance. And so, and yeah, it's annoying when your child does something that you don't want them to do, right? When it behaves in a way that you don't think is appropriate. But like that child is going to grow up to be a decision maker somewhere. And if they continue to think that this type of harmful behavior is okay, then they're going to perpetuate harm no matter where they go, right? Like that shit doesn't stay in the household. They take those attitudes with them to work. They take those attitudes with them in their relationships. They take those attitudes with them when they go to the gym, when they go to the movies, when they're shopping for a car, a house. And so that creates these power differentials between the hypothetical of what this child could become and every single person that he's going to encounter in his life.
And even if he doesn't become violent, you know, he's learning from his mom's response to this, that privilege that he exists inside of, right? So he could become a fine, upstanding citizen who doesn't harm people, right? Like to not take it as far to the extreme. But what he is still learning, regardless, is I, as a white boy who will become a white man, I
Can
don't
get
get
away with anything.
I can get away with things. Exactly. Like there's no potential harm here. It's okay. And what's the worst that happens is somebody gets a little hurt and I say sorry and it's all okay, right? Like he's not learning that same message that a black mom is having to teach her black son about the potential harm to his body because of decisions he makes. Whereas white men don't learn, as white boys aren't learning that same sort of thing of, hey, there's potential harm that can happen to you. He's learning there really aren't serious consequences in my life.
It's a mild annoyance to the people around me.
And that continues to be perpetuated. And the truth is, he's right, but we don't change it unless white moms take responsibility to teach our sons the same things that black moms must teach their sons so that they understand the power that comes with that privilege that they hold and how they can use that to make change. Or in the case of this boy who's not learning that, more than likely use that to continue to perpetuate the systems to their benefit.
Yeah.
And I can already hear in my head, I don't think these are our listeners, but some of the people on YouTube who love to comment on our clips.
The trolls who come out under their rock.
I can hear them saying things like, I can hear the eye rolls of like, this is why I can't stand liberals because you make such a big thing out of everything. And it was just a kid with a Nerf gun and like, oh my gosh, we all make silly mistakes and blah, blah, blah. Right. And because I see that behavior, those kinds of comments all the time from almost always very privileged people who like to come and say like, can't we just like, why does everything have to be so serious? Can't we just have things be what they are, which is like not a big deal. It was just a kid who made a mistake and his mom thought it was kind of annoying, but like made content out of it. But this is why understanding why everything is political is so important, because then you can start to get to that granular level to understand why every decision that you're making matters inside of this bigger context of the systems that we live in. And again, I just think as the person with the white body in the room, like I need to point out, like, especially for those of us, most especially who are white, but also most especially for men, to look at all of these smaller things and understand how they compound. It's a compounding effect.
Yeah.
Yes, in the moment, that one small example is just a small moment.
Yeah, it could very well just be a minor mistake.
And it's just a small moment. But if you don't have the awareness of why all of these little elements that feed into that small moment are part of these bigger issues that we live in society, if you don't bring that awareness with you through your movements throughout the day, it compounds. It's one moment after another that adds up to this bigger picture of, if this is the only time that little boy has that experience, it may very well be an isolated event that doesn't feed into a bigger picture for his narrative and his life. But more than likely, if mom does it once, she does it again and again and again. And then that compounds and compounds and compounds to create this perpetuating, this boy who will perpetuate the problems of white supremacy and patriarchy, right? So no, yes, we can laugh something off, or we can see each little moments as just little moments. But I think what matters, and what I think you and I both care deeply about, is trying to help people get to the place where they can bring that deeper level of awareness to how they show up, so that in those moments they can make more informed decisions about how I want to act in this moment. Because if that mom had that awareness, she might have handled it differently.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely don't think it's something, if I were a parent, I wouldn't create content out of in a situation like that, right? And I think the bottom line, you know, regardless of whether this was an isolated incident for that child or it is a series of just bad decisions both on the child's behalf and on the mom's behalf, is that parenting is a political endeavor, right?
Absolutely.
And when you are a parent, you are gifted with the responsibility of modeling for your child what is appropriate behavior and what is not. And you do that not just through direct teaching, but indirectly in how you respond to their behavior. And I'm not a parent, so I don't have that gift of that responsibility.
Gift and the curse.
But I'm about to be 43 and I've been around children for a really long time. I have nieces and nephews. I have friends who have children. And so I understand from watching what has been done from people I know, and also from my own experience being raised as a child, like understanding how much a parent's parenting style, the decisions that they make as they are a parent, as they choose to, or maybe not, I don't want to say choose to be a parent, but especially in these political times, but but in the way that they choose to parent once they have a child, I would say make a really big difference in how that child grows up. And so
I would say the biggest.
The biggest, absolutely. Like by laughing it off or just brushing it off as a casual annoyance, you are extending the boundary of what is okay for that child. And they're like, oh, I can do this. And what do we all know about children? They like to test limits.
Yeah, we all do.
Yeah. And so if they test that limit and they get away with it, they're just going to continue to push that boundary to see how much more they can get away with, right? And not that that's an insidious thing about children. It's just, like you said, we all like to test limits because that's our curiosity at play.
Absolutely. And it's also how children begin to assert autonomy, right? They have to start to learn, what can I do? What can't I do? And there's part of that is learning consequences to behaviors.
Right.
But at that age, and I'm speaking now as the parent here because I am a parent and I am a white-bodied person who's raising a white, eventually man. And so I feel a deep amount of responsibility in that endeavor. And I know that as the parent, sometimes the consequences need to come from parents, not from letting them, because you can't, it's such a hard part of parenting is learning when am I going to allow my child to suffer the natural consequences of their decisions versus protecting them from that, but giving them consequences so that they will not do those behaviors. As in, do I let my child burn themselves on the stove to learn that? Or do I teach them, like, do I create a consequence if they don't listen when I say don't play with the stove, right? That's a place where I would decide I don't want my child to bear the natural consequence of being burned as a lesson. Yeah. I will give them a different consequence, right? That's just an example, but we have to do that all the time as parents. So in the case of this kid with the gun, the mom could decide, I'll just wait till he shoots himself and gets hurt, right? And he'll learn, or maybe I will have another kind of consequence for him. Those are hard decisions that we have to make as parents all the time, but they're important decisions as kids learn their own autonomy. And I think parenting is not only the most important piece of deciding who a person becomes, I think parenting is ultimately the most important act in deciding who we are as a society, right? Because we are creating the next generation of leaders that are reinforcing, that either choose to reinforce or to fight against the systems as they exist. That little boy will likely grow up to be someone who will be actively engaged in preserving the systems as they exist. If the mom would have a conversation, as I choose to do with my son all the time, about this is the difference of your existence versus the existence of your friend who is Black, their existence for no other reason than because of the color of your skin and the systems in which we live. And we talk about what that means. My son goes to an incredibly diverse school, so he has a very diverse group of friends, which is the thing I love most about his school, is that he is not in the majority as a white student there. It is pretty much equally like a third of different racial makeup. That means he has a level of empathy that not everyone will have just by nature of knowing more children who look different than him. But I think it's our responsibility if we are white to help our children create that empathy, whether they have that through experience or through learning and by us creating experience. But I'm able to have those conversations with him to say, because my son has Nerf guns. I don't love guns. We talk a lot about guns. He loves playing Nerf guns with his friends and with his dad. And I understand, like, it's a fun outlet. Like, I enjoy, like, it's fun to do. But we have to talk a lot about what that means for gun safety, what that means for the difference between a fake gun and a real gun. Were he ever exposed to one, and what responsibilities there are there? We talk a lot about also what it means for him as a white-bodied person to be able to play with guns versus his friends, and where, and also then what that means later in life with, just with the ways that he is perceived inside the world, right?
Yeah.
Because I bring that back to his friends all the time. Other examples are like, kids saying things. I have discovered, I thought this died with like years ago, because when we were kids, people would use gay as a derogatory term, right?
Like, that's so gay.
Yeah, exactly. I thought that was gone long ago, but apparently it's not, which is...
It's making a comeback.
Yeah, very upsetting, which I think I will blame on YouTube. But so some of his friends say that, and having the ability to be able to say, my son has at least a couple of friends in his class who have same-sex parents. And so being able to say to him, what do you think that makes your friend feel who has two moms when you are calling someone, well, he doesn't, but I've heard his friends do it, when they say that. And he's able to find that empathy and through experience and understanding, but that doesn't happen naturally often at their age, because they don't have the reason and logic to be able to make those leaps, right?
Yeah.
That's where parenting comes in and is so important.
Yeah.
And why everything's political, going back to what we're talking about here, right? So the guns, me being able to use that understanding that I have of the difference in how an 8-year-old black boy playing Nerf at the park versus my 8-year-old white son playing Nerf guns at the park, I have an understanding of what that difference means. My son can't at 8 unless I teach him that, which is why my parenting in those moments are political. The very experience of using Nerf guns is political, right? And it is important for parents to understand that, to have those conversations. Doesn't mean... I think every parent makes their own choices. Does it mean that you can't ever let your kid play with Nerf guns? Some people make that choice, and I fully respected that was my intention. It didn't happen because it is so pervasive, and they have fun with it. So I think that means for me, what it looks like then, I bear a responsibility, though, if I'm going to allow my son to engage in that behavior, to make sure that I'm having conversations that contextualize for him the bigger systems in which he lives, instead of just being like, here's your Nerf gun, go have fun.
Yeah.
Which it sounds like, I think is what a lot of parents do. So you can have both. I'm just for the eye rollers who think, oh my God, it's just a Nerf gun. Yes, and right? Like, so yes, you can still choose to say, I'm going to let my kid play with Nerf guns. But the difference is, are you able to hold space for those conversations that help contextualize why it matters and why these issues are more important?
Yeah.
I did not mean to ramble so long. I have a lot of thoughts about parenting.
Yeah, no, because you are the parent here. So I think your perspective is essential to this part of the conversation. But I'm curious about the example that you gave at the start of the episode, and why that.
Well, and I'm sure you'll have lots of thoughts on this too. So, because here's the deal. Okay, I put on lipstick. Well, it's actually a lip oil that's tinted. Because I thought, right before I came on this, I was like, oh, I look washed out, and like, this is going to be on video, and I edit myself, so I see myself all the time, and I think, oh, try a little harder, whatever. But the decision to do that is political, because were I a man, men are very rarely, not all men, of course, because I'm going very much here in heteronormative terms, but generally, men aren't putting on makeup to be on Zoom or for anything, right? They go about their lives with their face in its natural state and receive very little, not that they receive none, but far less judgment about their natural existence than do women. Me deciding or not deciding to put on makeup at any given moment is political, because it's about me and how I show up and exist within these sexist systems that judge a woman's body and face differently than a man's body and their face. So just the decision to wear makeup is political.
Yeah.
But another piece of it that we didn't talk about with Nerf guns, but I think we can bring it here instead, which is the makeup that I choose is also deeply political.
Yeah.
Right? In the same way with the Nerf guns, who's making those toys?
Yeah.
Because that really matters, right? Who's making the makeup? Are they doing it in a way that's ethical? Are they testing on animals? Are they using products that are harming the environment? Is it made through, by a company that is some giant multi-billion-dollar corporation and who is exacerbating the problems of wealth disparity by paying a CEO 10,000 times more than their lowest paid employee? Like, there are a host of issues that go into the choice around what makeup you choose. In this case, I'm happy to say that I've chosen a product that I happen to know because I interviewed the owner for my podcast, which is Cheekbone Beauty. So I'll throw out a little mention here because I absolutely love the lip oil. It's tinted. It makes my lips feel really moist, which is nice because it actually puts oil into my lips. And it's an indigenous owned company that's a B Corp, which means that they are certified for making good choices around the products they're using. They're vegan and all of that are better for the environment. And the way that they run their company is far more sustainable and serving of the people in the company. And it's a smaller company. But that's not always the case. I'm taking some credit there because this individual choice I made was a really good choice. But I can tell you my makeup bag also includes things that are not so fabulous.
Yeah.
Right? I know I have some products from Rihanna, who I love, but also, she's a billionaire at this point, and there's all the issues that come up with that. And then I have products that are from just like L'Oreal or whoever that are deeply problematic. So the choice to wear makeup is political, and the kind of makeup you choose is political. What are your thoughts? I don't know. It doesn't look to me like you're wearing makeup. You could be, but I don't think you're wearing makeup today. What do you feel about that?
I'm not. I don't usually wear makeup. And that's not because I don't
usually
makeup.
Either.
I like makeup. I have a whole bag full of makeup that I just never touch. Right. And so if it's like a special occasion, I will occasionally beat my face, as the kids say. But I love makeup.
The kids say that? I'm so old. I've never heard that. That doesn't even sound nice. That sounds horrible.
Yeah. It's like face beat, or like your face card is never declined. Like there's all this like language about, your face being on point, to use more millennial.
I know that term, language. So it must be out. That's not, nobody says that anymore.
Yeah. But I like 100% agree with you. And I will also add that like there's obviously a difference in gender, right? And how, performative masculinity and performative femininity are judged, right? Between men and women, people who identify as men and women. But then there's also like deeper layers between how women are judged against each other, right? And so like the first thing that came to mind is like that one beauty influencer, I think last year or maybe a couple years ago, who like called out a beauty brand who sent her samples that were supposed to be specifically for Black skin people or brown skin people. And it just was a fail in so many ways. And so like she called them out, and it was like a whole thing or whatever. And then like shortly after that, I think is when Rihanna came out with like she expanded her line of like foundations, and it was just so many skin tones available. And it's like, okay, like it was a good example of like how to do makeup for Black and brown skin people. And so, but I agree. I love Rihanna. My wife loves Rihanna. Rihanna is on my wife's hall pass list. She's not on mine, but I do love her. But yeah, she's a billionaire now, right? And
she's on my husband's hall pass list too, by the way. Yeah, she's amazing. And as an individual human, she seems great. This was a topic for later, so we'll come back to this one soon, which is
for sure.
You could be a good person and still be unethical for being a billionaire.
Yeah.
And so we can talk about that a little bit. Rihanna and Taylor Swift, like there's great examples of that. And I think Rihanna is one of those.
Yeah, definitely. But I mean, I'm recording on my iPad, right? And there has always been a big controversy about how Apple products are made and the kind of unethical labor practices that have to happen in other places. So that creates a sense of detachment from responsibility about those labor practices in order to make the products that we enjoy every day. And I think this is where the messy part happens, right? Like,
correct.
I'm not going to throw away my iPad because then that would be wasteful, but I'm going to try not to invest more money into products that could be unethically made. But at the same time, like, the Apple products are the best on the market.
Well, and also it doesn't matter. There's no substitute that's any more ethical because they all use lithium batteries. And those are fundamentally the biggest problem is how that is being mined. And so it doesn't, you can switch. Maybe it's slightly better in some ways, but they're still going to be the same problems, right? And that sort of feels like, I think another piece of this that we didn't get to is class and ableism. I think those are issues. So, we've talked about race, we've talked about sex. We've talked about some of the key things here that are the systems. So when, everything being political, these are the systems inside of which we live. We live inside of sexist systems. We live inside of white supremacist systems. We also live inside of ableist systems and classist systems, along with a whole bunch of other things. And so the reason these decisions are so political is because we exist inside of that. Speaking of, the computer as an example, you have to have a computer, right? To be able
These days,
right? To work, to find a job if you're unemployed, whatever that looks like. So maybe you go to the library, you don't own it, but you're still using it. You can't escape using it. But it's also not a great decision. I was actually thinking on the class issue of makeup, making the more ethical choice in makeup on almost anything, making the more ethical choice almost always comes at a premium.
Yeah.
Because for it to be more ethical, it has to be made in a way that actually pays people living wages. That always means a higher price tag.
Yeah. It also usually takes more time to make the product, right? Yeah. Because there's more testing involved to make sure that it's not going to create harm.
Right. And so that means if you want to make more ethical choices about, in this case, makeup, you have to have more money. You're going to have to spend more money. And so that inherently is a classist issue. Because it means that folks who have less money either have to make the choice to say, I won't use makeup, but then also deal with all of the fallout of that. As women especially, we know that if you show up at a job interview without makeup, if you show up for I'm just going to stick with job interview, but in a whole place, almost anywhere, when you show up without makeup, you will be perceived in a different way.
Absolutely.
And generally, at a job interview, you will be perceived as somebody who cares less, right? Who doesn't take care of themselves. You'll be perceived as older, which we know bringing in ageism is a detriment. All of these ways that you're going to be perceived. So now this person who has less money either has to make the choice to not wear makeup and deal with the fallout of that, or buy a less expensive product so that they can actually show up and with the makeup and know that they're contributing to these issues. Same with clothing. That fits in that same category. All of it.
We could talk about fast fashion for days.
Exactly. And it's easy to judge people for making the bad, quote unquote, bad choice.
But there are no good choices.
Exactly. Because one choice is they deal with the fallout, the harm of that versus the harm of what the product causes. And we deal with that all the time. And so many of these decisions also we have to think about, even in the case of a Nerf gun, it's also political because are they making options for folks for kids with disabilities, for kids who may not be able to pull the
trigger
the way it is, or a lot of them are these really difficult loading kind of things, and there's all sorts of pieces of that then exclude a lot of children who can't
children with
use
disabilities.
Those. Whether it's a physical disability, maybe they have a neuro difference that doesn't allow them to use it. Again, it doesn't mean you can't use the products. It's the piece of understanding it that I think is so important, because we go about the motions of our life interacting with everything around us without taking a moment to consider, how does this microphone, this
picture.
Computer, this, whatever it is that's around me, literally everything on my desk I could point to. I have my prescription here. God knows that medical is, everything around us is deeply political, and being able to unpack that and understand it, I just think is such an important piece of us then being more engaged in the fight for justice.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it can become overwhelming because it's if there are no good choices, then does it even really matter? And the answer is yes, it does matter, right? Because one, you are learning more about where your stuff is coming from and you're able to make better decisions, right? And also it gives you agency, right? If you're just well, it doesn't matter, so I'm just going to nilly-willy, not be intentional about my decisions, you're not really exercising your agency there as a consumer. You're not really exercising your agency, your ability to choose for yourself. You're just taking what is given to you. And so giving yourself the space and the time to actually be informed about where your products are coming from and what is the best way to raise responsible, ethical, equitable children, like everything that we've talked about today, then you actually tap into that power to choose for yourself what you want your life to look like and what that means for the decisions that you make on a day-to-day basis. And that's not always going to be easy. And sometimes it's going to feel like no matter what decision you make, right, it's just going to be like, well, it's the lesser of two evils kind of argument. But I think the more that we can exercise that power, then the more responsible human beings we become, which creates momentum, right? If more people do that, then it creates more momentum and it allows us to then tap into ways to hold these companies accountable for their unfair wage practices or their exploitative labor practices or etc. You were talking about the makeup thing, about how women are judged for like going into job interviews and different places for wearing makeup or not wearing makeup. And I have two very opposite anecdotes about that. Like I remember I had started one job and I was like, you know what? I'm going to start wearing makeup at this job. Like that's going to be my thing because, I want to be like quote unquote presentable. And so as soon as I went into the interview with makeup. As soon as I started the job, I was wearing makeup every day. And then one day I was like tired for whatever reason and didn't have time or just decided that I just didn't want to do it that day. And I walked into the office and everybody kept asking me if I was okay. And I was like, yeah, I'm fine. Like, why? And they're like, well, you look really tired. You look sick. Like, people were so unused to seeing my regular face that they assumed something was wrong with me when I wasn't wearing makeup. And let me tell you, when I wear makeup, I don't wear a lot of makeup. I use a very natural look. And then I had another job where I didn't hardly ever wear makeup at all. And then one day I walked into the office with makeup because I had just bought some new makeup. And I was like, oh, I want to try it out. And everyone was like, ooh, do you like someone in the office? Like, why are you
I've
wearing
had that
makeup?
experience, but they usually are like, are you to have a job interview today? That's your like, and I have the same reaction with my husband because I never wear makeup. When he sees me with makeup, he's always like, what's happening today? Like, what's going on? Like, sometimes I just want to like, but we do get conditioned into seeing people a certain way. So that's funny. I've had that experience too. I wanted to say on what you were talking about with the malaise, like the giving up, because I can tell you, especially when it comes to climate change issues, which feels so fucking enormous and insurmountable and depressing, I have certainly found myself wanting to sometimes just say, fuck it. I give up. It's hopeless. What's the point? Right? So why bother with a metal straw today? Because we're all going to die. Like, I can find myself getting into that. And we do have to be really careful to avoid that. And I understand the pull towards that in all the ways we can kind of say, well, if everything's political, we can't get anything right. Why bother? And I mean, we even literally hear people say that on more of the sort of right wing side of things, who'll be like, well, I'm just going to get canceled anyway, so I might as well just do whatever the fuck I want. Right? Like that kind of attitude. And I think it's really important for us to go back to remembering what's the world we want to build. And I know that can be hard, but focusing on the like, instead of on the what we don't want, what's not working, all of that, but what is it that I want to create? What am I working towards? What am I building? So that we can collectively begin to make a difference, even if it's in a smaller way in our own spaces, our own communities. But that's where change starts, right? It starts small. It starts within your own company. If you own a company, you're listening to this, what are the decisions you're making there? It starts within your own home, within the privilege that you have, right? So we can't do everything perfectly, but what can I do better? What can I do that moves me closer to that world I want to build? How can I work collectively towards that world I want to build? And I think the other big piece of that is then also, how do I use, as you talked about agency, another piece of agency you didn't mention, but I think is important, is our vote for now. As long as we live in a democracy-ish, as long as the oligarchy allows us to vote, we have to also think about that. What does it look like for me to use that vote? And not just at a federal big level, but like locally.
At the local level.
Right? What's the difference I make on my school board so that I can make sure that the books my kids are reading are, real history, right? That's political and it matters. And we can make those differences in our local community, our local experience. And those things add up over time. But I do think when we look too globally, too big at the whole thing, that's when we get overwhelmed.
It gets overwhelming.
So I think we have to just look within our own space, whether you just start like today, you can just start and look around the space you're in. I'm in my office. I could look around this space and just say, what choices could I make in this space today that would make me feel like I moved incrementally closer towards the world I'm wanting to build, right? Maybe that looks like, I'm just thinking about like medication even. Like if I buy, because I take all these damn vitamins, what does it look like to buy them in bulk so that I'm using less packaging? There's one small, simple decision that if I can afford to do that, just switch from buying monthly to can I pay quarterly or every 6 months to buy a bigger bulk amount so that I'm not using as much packaging. Boom. There's one decision I could make, right? So I think just thinking about what's the world I want to build and how do I bring it down to a more granular level that does feel like I have some agency, like you mentioned.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that's a really way to just kind of close this conversation out because yes, looking at the big picture, it's like, where do you even tap in? Well, you tap in your own space, right?
Yeah.
And, to wrap up, everything is political because we can't escape the systems, right? If the systems were different, the politics of existing would be different. But we are politicized by merely existing in the systems that we have to. And so if we can make incremental small changes for ourselves, then we can feel and make, an impact where we are. And if everybody does that, then that snowballs.
Exactly. And even if not everybody, even if only 35% of us, the 35% of people who, supported a more liberal ticket, if those 35% all made different choices, that really adds up to a lot. So it's a new year. Forget the new year, new you, but a new year, new attitude of like, how do I think about things a little bit differently and just challenge myself in 2025 to think about the political nature of every decision I make, everything around me. I think that would make a massive difference. So I'm going to make a commitment to be doing more of that too.
Yeah. So, all right. Sounds good.
Thanks
cheers
for
to 2025.
Yeah. Cheers.
Thanks for listening to Messy Liberation.
Will you please take a moment to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen?
I know people say that all the time. And if you're like me, often you just go on to the next podcast. But truly, taking that moment to do that will really help us reach a wider audience.
Thank you so much for your support and for listening today.
Until next time.